It's Ariel. Just wanted to do a little talk about the problem of people feeling ashamed at having epilepsy. There are lots of reasons that people think at this point that epilepsy is still all these different things that it's not. So it's understandable that people who get diagnosed with epilepsy find it scary because it's very not well understood. It's very misunderstood. So there are a lot of reasons that people are afraid to acknowledge or accept the diagnosis of epilepsy. I think there's just some good examples here. This book, The Epilepsy Patient and Family Guide, I think it's interesting that in 400 BC, Hippocrates wrote a book called On the Sacred Disease, and it's about epilepsy, and he recognized that it was a brain disorder, but in general, people were not recognizing that it was a brain disorder. And so people would think that somebody who had a seizure was having a prophetic, experience. So they would prophesize, or thinking that they were cursed, or that they were possessed by the devil, or any other thing, that they're witches. That was another one. It was in one of the characteristics of a witch when they did witch hunts. There are people, even in this country, there were laws that basically you couldn't marry people because you couldn't have kids if you had epilepsy. These laws just recently, and I say recently, I mean in the last 40 years, 20 years sometimes, have gotten taken away. But there also was allowed sterilization of people with epilepsy. So the problems with worrying that what's going to happen or what are people going to think if you have epilepsy, or if you say you have epilepsy, or just for yourself to think, oh my God, I have epilepsy. It doesn't need to be all of the things that it's not, all of these other concerns that that you are possessed, or that you might be crazy, or that a lot of people in the past, long past sometimes, but thought you were cursed, and that is not true. It is a brain disorder. It's rhythmic misfiring of your brain. The neurons, you have a problem and they start discharging too fast. So you end up with a electrical storm. So basically, I think it's really important to understand that epilepsy is nothing other than a neurological brain disorder. That's okay. You can handle that diagnosis probably. It's all the things that go along with it that people are afraid of, and the stigma associated with it, because so many people don't understand seizures. They don't understand epilepsy, and when you say epilepsy, it scares them. So most people who get diagnosed with epilepsy suddenly have a seizure, go into the neurologist, talk to them, they say you have epilepsy. You go, oh my God, I can't handle this. Well, there's some problems with that. People are afraid to acknowledge that because they think it says that there's something wrong with them, and that they are, not good enough, and that there's basically something wrong with your mind and your brain, and you're not normal, and what's normal, but there's something really wrong with you. And it doesn't need to be anything other than, okay, I have a brain disorder. So epilepsy, the definition is that you've had 2 or more seizures without a clear cause. So that sounds different than maybe the explanation is, because when you have recurrent and unprovoked seizures, you have epilepsy. If you've had provoked seizures, they call them, then things like heart problems can cause people to have seizures from lack of oxygen to the brain. Things like alcohol withdrawal, people can have seizures from that. But it's not an epileptic seizure because the person's having alcohol withdrawal, so they're having a seizure. So that's what they call provoked. Also, drugs or low blood sugar, really low blood sugar, especially in diabetics. So somebody with super low blood sugar has a seizure. It's not that they have epilepsy, it's that they have diabetes and extremely low blood sugar, and that caused a seizure. So unprovoked seizures, if you have epilepsy, what it means is that you have seizures that just happen. Now, granted, you can have 1 or 2, get on medication, never have another one, and be on medication for years and not, you don't have to have a certain number of them, but usually people assume that if you've had one, they'll wait until you've had two to make sure it wasn't a fluke, but not always. So it's not that you need to wait, but that's kind of the definition, is like that you've had 2 or more unprovoked seizures. Now this is talking about small partial seizures and tonic-clonic seizures, or any other kind of seizure. So accepting the fact that epilepsy, the word epilepsy, can be a problem for people. I didn't want to call what I had epilepsy until I was about 19 or something. I got it when I was, started having seizures at age 12, but I did not want to say I have epilepsy because it felt like I was accepting something that I wasn't willing to believe, that there was something really wrong with me, or that I was ashamed of. I didn't want to share with anybody. So I never told anybody. I mean, only my closest friends knew. And that is a problem because you're hiding, you're feeling ashamed, and that can be really detrimental to your well-being and your quality of life and how much you share with other people, how open you are about your life, how open you are about what you go through every day, how much you share with people you love in your life, what's really going on. If you don't share the information about how much time you spend having seizures, taking medication, going to doctors, being confused about the whole thing, trying to learn about the whole thing, when you have a seizure, the time it takes to recover, all of those things, if you're not telling anybody that any of that actually exists, you may not be very open with people, and that can be really detrimental to your relationships with them. So shame is not helpful. It's not anything that you need. Realizing that having seizures unprovoked is epilepsy, and that they're the same thing. It's just a seizure disorder. That there's not some kind of other meaning. Epilepsy just means you have a seizure disorder. So it's important to realize that you can possibly just accept that, and then you can talk to people about it more easily. If you say, because if somebody asks you, well, if you say I have seizures, and they go, well, do you have epilepsy? Yes, most people associate a stigma with epilepsy, so they don't want to accept that term. Personally, I think it's really helpful to accept all of it, the term specifically, and then it's more easier to find other people with epilepsy than if you think, oh, I just have seizures, I don't have epilepsy, all those people with epilepsy are different than me. It's going to be more helpful to be able to find information if you accept that it is epilepsy. Also, the main thing is just that shame can be so debilitating. It keeps people from getting help. It keeps people from getting the care that they need. It keeps people from sharing with others that, I'm experiencing this. If you have partial seizures, you can experience them and it's not obvious to other people. You can hide that. And is that really worth hiding? I don't think so anymore. And I used to hide it. I spent, years and years of not sharing about the fact that I had epilepsy till I was like 19 and I got on a medication, but I wasn't willing to accept that I had epilepsy until I got on, until I was way older. And then when I got on medication, I had trouble accepting the medication for years. I still didn't want to accept that I had to live this life, that this is what I was dealing with, and that this was my situation. And I just didn't want to accept it. And so I understand if you don't want to accept that you have epilepsy, and if you feel ashamed, or if you feel, from all these problems, there's just all this stigma associated, there's this history that's associated with it. People in certain times have thought that epilepsy was contagious. So people, were separated because they would put people in asylums for having epilepsy, but they had to be separated from the psychiatric disorder people because it was contagious, they thought. So there's all kinds of history here. And I can understand how people have, an issue with worrying what the world is going to think. What's really important is if you get some support from people who understand that you're fine, you're just you, and you have epilepsy, and it's okay to have epilepsy, and you're great just the way you are. especially if you can find some people with epilepsy so you don't feel so alone. Then you can share more about your life. You can be open with the people in your world, in your life. You know, you can tell your people, granted there's problems sometimes with people telling people at work because they're afraid they're going to get, you know, kicked out because of their seizures. But I'm talking about, in general, talking about to people about your epilepsy, because that is what's going on in your life a lot of the time. I've spent years of time dealing with this, and to hide that from everyone really didn't help at all. It didn't. It made things worse. So I find that being ashamed really doesn't do any good for anybody. And so being empowered and accepting what is, and in this case, if you have epilepsy, accepting that can be really tough, but it's totally worth it. It's really worth learning to believe yourself and your experience that you are great even if you have epilepsy. So as much as you can, realize that there's nothing wrong with you. There's not something weird about you that makes you awful. I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it is that people tend to think about, but somehow the stigma associated with epilepsy causes a lot of people to feel a lot of shame around epilepsy and not want to share it. So I think the only way we're going to get people to understand epilepsy, and I realized this finally, was that they have to talk to them about it. I mean, if you don't tell people, like I said, at your work, or, you know, that you meet, or that your friends, or, you know, in some cases I was saying work because I was thinking of safety problems, you know, or issues, because sometimes, like, I needed to tell the people at my jobs that I had seizures because I didn't know when they would happen because they weren't fully controlled. So if you don't tell people, you might be in a dangerous situation. That also happened because it would happen at the wrong place at the wrong time, and you know, it's scary to experience that and to then have to explain to somebody what's going on right then. It's a lot easier if you've talked to them about your epilepsy before that. I really encourage everyone to not feel ashamed of having epilepsy and to really accept the condition as just what it is. And it's just a thing in your life that is a part of your life. And it's okay to be all right with it. It's okay to just say, okay, this is what I've got. How am I going to deal with it? And what's the most helpful, positive way that I can deal with it? Most likely getting support, sharing about it, learning about it, and helping others with it, and helping people to learn more about it so that the stigma goes down, or goes away, preferably. And I really encourage people to share because of the fact that not enough people know much about epilepsy, and so they are scared when they hear the word epilepsy. And the only way that we're going to change that is if we talk more about it and share and say, oh, this is what epilepsy is. Otherwise, it's not going to change. So working on accepting, acknowledging, and being empowered around epilepsy and not letting that shame control you is really, really vital. Blessings.